Next up, the wireless. Marcus Stickley from Radio New Zealand National is here to talk about this project. It's more about kids.
So before I start talking about what I've been up to, I wanted to find out a little bit about you all. So hands up if you listen to Radio New Zealand. And hands up if you stream Radio New Zealand or download podcasts. And hands up if you go to the Radio New Zealand website to read the news. And hands up if you've ever been to the wireless software. Cool, great. Sounds like there's a few people out there that have been there, a few that haven't, so I'll be able to share something new with you. Depth, insight, integrity, and new ideas from New Zealand and around the world. Over the decades, this is what Radio New Zealand has built its reputation on. Radio New Zealand wins international awards for its news coverage, its documentaries, and its interviews. Being non-commercial means it's free to tell the stories that its editors and journalists think are important. It's an alternative. And if you're like me, when you set your radio dial to 101.3 FM or whatever it is in your region, you get news, information and ideas that make you think. There's no other radio station like it in the country, but its audience is aging. It used to be that radio listeners would pick up the habit of listening to Radio New Zealand as they got older, but this doesn't happen as much anymore. To young people, sometimes it can come across as dull and conservative and something their grandparents and parents listen to, and that's really because it is. I should have told you that was going to be roaming.
Much better. So, in general, people under 30 are spending less time listening to the radio than previous generations, and those that do are less loyal to one station and less loyal to even one media organisation. They expect the stories that are important to them to come to them. With the digital revolution, Radio New Zealand is far from alone in trying to capture this younger demographic. Media, arts and culture organisations here and overseas are grappling with the same problem, as you all know and as we've seen from the Minecraft presentation as well. Radio New Zealand knew that it needed a new brand and platform that would take a digital-first approach and communicate in the language of its audience. Repackaging interviews with anyone under 30 who'd spoken to Kim Hill on a website with some zany colours called Radio New Zealand Youth wasn't going to work either. It was suggested at one stage. This is where the wireless comes in. Now, we launched just over a year ago with the aim of telling stories for and by young New Zealanders. How young is young? Loosely, our target demographic is 18 to 30, although we do think of our demographic as not so much being confined by an age bracket, but more a kind of life stage. You know, people that are trying to figure out where to go, what to do with their lives. I know sometimes that doesn't go away, no matter how old you are. Everyone in our team of 4 is aged under 35, and most of our contributors are in their 20s. The youngest I know of is 19. And where the wireless has come from actually has quite a legacy. It was born out of the idea of a youth radio network, which has been debated throughout the past 20 years, been championed by the likes of Neil Finn, Arthur Basting and Mike Chun, but there was never the political will or the funding to make it happen, and there was also a lot of opposition from commercial radio stations. And now in 2014, I really think the time for launching a youth radio network has actually passed. I mean, at least one that has an FM frequency bouncing between radio towers. Our audience is on its laptops, tablets, and mobile phones. The internet is a visual medium, and we're communicating with a visual generation. Our audience wants information and insight to help them make choices about how to live their lives as much as any older demographic. They also want media that doesn't treat them as a set of statistics or another. I mean, we've all read Youth Gone Wild stories in newspapers and online. Luckily, the wireless has been allowed to develop on its own, follow its own path. When the team came together, we came up with a strategy, we came up with the ideas for the content, and it was very hands-off, and it was almost quite a strange experience. We were working in our own bubble, in our own little space in Radio New Zealand National, and we actually had a real job educating people what we were up to. Our focus on digital actually took us away from being radio, and so it's understandable that this was confusing for some. After all, we were part of Radio New Zealand. And even after we launched, some people carried on calling us the Youth Radio Network, even though the focus was very much on the website and being multimedia. So there were quite a few conversations to be had about what we were doing and convincing people of its value. And now, kind of a year on since we launched and 18 months since the project started, we have some really great collaborative relationships, particularly with Radio New Zealand's music team. Every week we share story ideas with them, and we've teamed up on covering music festivals like Laneway and Big Day Out, where they help us with live blogging the event. We'll help them with collecting audio for their show. So coupled with the aim of reaching a younger audience, the wireless is also a place for Radio New Zealand to try out new ways of storytelling online. The question we ask is, what's the best way to tell this story? Could this make a great video? Could we explain this with a GIF? And even comics are part of the mix. We're lucky enough to have an illustrator called Toby Morris who does a weekly kind of comic comment piece for us called The Pencil Sword, which I'd really encourage you to check out if you have time. So there are a number of ways of explaining an issue. As a journalist, what you do depends on your sources, the skills that you've got in your team, and the platforms that you have available. For example, the wireless might do a written feature that has a short video clip embedded in it, or we shoot a longer video, like a mini documentary, but have the producer write a first-person piece about how they put together that story, the experience of doing it, and what they learnt while doing the story. One or two key voices from that feature might appear on our new weekly podcast on the dial, and we could also pitch them to Radio New Zealand's radio producers, so maybe they end up on 9 to Noon or Morning Report. The wireless has also been running events based around issues. Probably the best example so far is our #WhyVote panel discussion, which was exploring the value of voting amongst young people, and as well as creating a live experience of the wireless for our audience and content for the website. We also attracted media attention from other media, and we had Salient magazine do a story. Radio New Zealand National did a documentary about Youth Vote based on some of the audio that we'd had. BFM had 2 interviews, and George FM mentioned it as well because it got trending on Twitter. So it's a really great way to amplify what we do, get our name out there, and bring together a group of people for a conversation about a big issue that's important to our audience. Like the rest of Radio New Zealand, we're publicly funded, so we've got the freedom to do stories that we think matter to our audience. But if a story doesn't find an audience, I think it's really hard to argue that there's value in doing it. Of course, there's a balance to be struck, and we do exist to do stories for all New Zealanders. And this doesn't mean that we want all New Zealanders to come to one story. It means doing stories about lots of different niches, so there's a real diversity there. Not all New Zealanders are catered for by commercial media, and this is where we can provide the most value by covering a cross-section of youth culture and issues. Now I've got a video with just some highlights, which we can play right now if they're queued up.
I think it's essential to feel connected to the city. You know, you feed off other people, and that's something that a lot of cities lose, is that you just become very insular. You have your job, you have your few friends that you go out with, you might have a partner or family, but you don't really connect on a wider scale with people.
I was asked if I wanted to be in the Māori class, and my parents thought that was cool because everyone in our neighbourhood was pretty much Māori, or at least it would be good for me to understand things about Māori culture.
We woke up in the morning, and then we're just sitting around, and then we heard a gunshot, and then people were just like, nah, that was just maybe someone dropped something somewhere.
Eating organically, those are trends that started in restaurants. Things like putting prosciutto and melon, that's a trend that started in a restaurant. Those went pretty large. And if what we're doing here with offal can even in a small way influence people's dining habits, then we would be stoked.
I've been playing basketball for most of my life, since I was about 8 or 9, and all through high school and college, and now I'm here.
It's really about kind of asserting our political power as young people, engaging young people, using the election as that kind of political switch of activation, because I think if we can come together and use this opportunity to come together, then we can kind of stand as one unified youth bloc and say, hey, this is important, you need to listen to us.
ولا يجدون في صدورهم حاجة مما أوتوا ويؤثرون على أنفسهم ولو كان بهم خصاصة ومن يوق شح نفسه فأولئك هم المفلحون.
My name is Hamish. I've come to one of Christchurch's busiest malls on a rainy Sunday to try and find out why we have such a bond with mall culture.
There are a few vampire politicians, they can't be named for legal reasons.
They have, some of them have convinced people of some pretty crazy stuff, so yeah, definitely in there.
I am young and so up and coming, I better see you running cause my state is gunning.
Cool. So, even if you're a vampire or like eating offal, we've got something for you. Online producing content is only half the job. The other half is getting it to your audience. More than half our traffic comes from social media. We're a new brand, so we're really having to try to cut through what's already out there to attract a loyal audience. The question that we ask when we're writing our social media posts is, what's the best way to sell this story? And this isn't so much about trying to, selling it as luring people in, as figuring out what kind of bite from the bigger story we could provide, something that's like a micro story and has value on its own. But also encourages our audience to dig a bit deeper and come see the full story and hopefully spend a little bit of time on the website. A post that has value on its own is more likely to be liked, retweeted, or reposted. In short, we're creating content that aims to make you click, think, share, and hopefully join in a conversation. We're now starting to have Radio New Zealand news reporters seconded to the wireless, where they're able to develop their writing skills and work with photographers and videographers on developing multimedia. It's been really great to see, and it's helping to spread some of these digital skills throughout the company. When I came to Radio New Zealand, I really saw it as a bastion of old media values. And this is great in a lot of ways. There's a dedication to fairness, accuracy, balance, depth, diversity. But along with this also comes a mindset of acting as a gatekeeper, kind of giving your audience what you think is best for them, And with the wireless from the start, it's really been about finding out what our audience wants, and ever since we launched, creating a dialogue with them, listening to them. I think these days, whether you're a media company or any sort of business, being successful is more and more about creating a community and keeping them engaged and in a conversation. Yeah, I've really seen Radio New Zealand change quite dramatically now. There's been a shift to using social media, to using social media a lot more to get the news out. Senior correspondents are writing columns for the web, which is a real break from this kind of journalists shouldn't have an opinion or a personality. And I mean, the focus has been very much on analysis rather than opinion, but it's just, that kind of edging away from the faceless journalist. They're also producing much more video, and Radio New Zealand now has its own Vimeo and YouTube channels. There's more talk about getting to where Radio New Zealand's potential online audience is. And the wireless can't claim credit for all these changes, but I think it has helped provoke conversations about what Radio New Zealand could be doing and provide examples of what can be done. So now Radio New Zealand's very focused on online audience growth, and I think what started with the wireless is really just the beginning, and over the next few years, funding allowing, Radio New Zealand will have a much stronger and richer online presence. For New Zealand's only non-commercial public service media organisation, I think that's a really exciting place to be. Thank you.